Had a big head, rounded ears, 6 feet in the body maybe, with a very, very long tail, very muscular build. As it was walking, it was still looking at me, and that's when I really panicked.
It looked at me and thought, oh, there's a human there, I'm not scared. You say, well, I've seen this big cat, and some people just flatly refuse. They think that Britain's such a sweet little island, we shouldn't have predators that size.
I heard this growl behind me, nothing like a dog's growl, and just like anything else in life, you're sat on your own there. I don't care who you are, how brave you are, something like that will put the shivers up your spine.
As she was walking, before the cub came out, she flicked this tail. She literally flicked it in the air, and I simply could not believe what I was seeing. It was the most extraordinary feeling.
It threw its head back, he said, and it made this sort of round.
But when you actually realise that there are big cats living in Britain, it changes everything.
Welcome to Big Cat Conversations. We speak directly to people who've encountered one of Britain's big cats. We also discuss the bigger picture. Why are unofficial big cats being seen, and could these cats even be naturalising without us knowing? If you've had a big cat encounter in Britain and would like to discuss it, email me at rick@bigcatconversations.com. You can find other episodes on the website bigcatconversations.com. I'm Rick Minter, and thanks for joining me. Hello everyone, and welcome to the show, and this episode is a Gloucestershire special. We're going to be looking back a few years, especially around 2011, when two different witnesses had very close-up encounters with cats in different parts of the county. Google Maps shows that they were about 20 miles apart. So one was east of the River Severn near Stroud, and one was west of the River Severn towards Forester Dean. And we're going to start near Stroud first of all, and I'm going to introduce Corinne. And she's going to take us through all the different parts of the saga of seeing this cat over probably 3 years, I think it was. Corinne, we really appreciate you coming on, because I know at that time you did quite a lot of media interviews, and maybe you could sometimes get a bit jaded by that, but I think you knew it was quite important at the time. So a few years on, thanks for coming back.
You're welcome.
And I guess there were several parts to the whole saga, weren't there? Could you start by telling us about the first times you were seeing this cat across the valley, and what you were thinking and what you did?
Yes, okay, well, the first time I saw it, I'd lived in the house about 18 months. It was July, and I'd never heard of big cats in this country at all. Didn't know there were any reports of them. And I was sitting outside the front of the house looking across in a steep-sided valley, and I saw something. The farmer had just cut the hay, so the grass was really short, and I could see something moving about in the field. And I'd got used to the view by this point, and I could tell when it was a fox or a deer or a cat or a dog or rabbits, pheasants. We see everything over there. When I looked over there, and it just had this great big long tail, and I thought, well, that's a bit odd. And I didn't have any binoculars handy. And then it disappeared off into the bushes. And then the next night, about the same time, early evening, I saw it again. And this time I did have binoculars ready. And it just looked like an enormous cat. So I Googled it, and I found Frank Tunbridge's, not his website, his phone number. And people had been writing in about this for quite a number of years. And
I ought to quickly say, Corinne, Frank Tunbridge is going to appear in episode 4 of our podcast, so people will sort of hear all about him and the work he does, sort of advising witnesses like you. So that's the sort of background to Frank.
Yes, okay. So I went on holiday to Greece for 2 weeks the following day, and was thinking about it while I was away. So when I got back, I phoned up Frank, and he came round a few days later and said, well, yeah, it was a big cat. It was a leopard, black leopard that you saw, as though, I'd just told him I'd seen a chicken. It was like, well, yeah, it's nothing special, tell me about it. And he took some notes. And then I don't think I saw it again for the rest of that year then. And then following summer, roughly about the same time, again, the hay had just been cut. And this time, Frank had lent me a really old VHS camera. So I had that. And in the evening again, I was looking out and there it was. So I went and got the camera, balanced it on a big pile of CDs that were on the windowsill, pressed record, ran over the road to get my neighbour. He got his telescope out and we both watched it for about 45 minutes, just mooching around the field. And then it disappeared into the hedge, must have crossed the lane and came out in the field above. Yeah, and I got some grainy, because it was an old camera, but some quite good footage of it. And apparently it was mousing in the hay that was left in the field. And it was just wandering around, not bothering anybody. And by then I knew what it was.
Yeah, and so you were ready and it was handy because it was from your own sort of bedroom window and lounge window.
Yes.
So you could have a camera at hand in that situation.
Yeah, that's right.
And you'd seen it. How many times do you think you'd seen it before you filmed it, Corinne?
I think I'd seen it twice. Those 2 days before I went to Greece the previous year. And then I saw it again the night I filmed it, and I've seen it since.
Yeah, and it definitely, I mean, I've looked at the footage, and it definitely does appear to be sort of foraging for stranded rodents, doesn't it, in the freshly cut, like foxes and domestic cats do, to get easy pickings after the freshly cut hay.
Yes, and when we filmed it, there was it was sniffing around at the top of the field, and then a white van came along the lane and spooked it a bit, and it then darted off down the field.
Yeah, it's doing a poo, isn't it? It's sitting.
I think it was actually. Yeah. And then there was also at the bottom of the field, which is closer to me, there was a fox, so you could get some sort of perspective, because the cat was much further away, and with that angle, it looked, the same size as the fox, even though it was a long way away.
Yeah, and the folds of the field meant that the fox couldn't see it. We reckoned that's
because it
at the time
dips away towards me.
Yeah, and it's a long view across the valley, so you had to really zoom in and hold it pretty still.
I did.
Because
yeah,
that's difficult to do. In fact,
it is. Yeah, with a handheld old camera.
I think there's a little bit of the footage still on an ITN website, isn't it? Because I know that a little snippet, about 10 seconds worth, was released, but the rest of it's been kept for a documentary which somebody's preparing.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that a bit more. I know some people say, "Oh, it's a fox," but I know that you and I and Frank and others have sat down with various people, including a professor of zoology, who've all said, "No, that is definitely a cat."
Yes.
And we'll talk about the scaling in a minute, because the scaling has really helped as well. But it's an unusual type of cat. We'll come on to that. But I quickly just want to ask you about how you found dealing with the press and getting feedback from friends and neighbours and people in the community when you started talking about it in the first time. Because, I mean, you had a lot of mixed reactions, and I guess you have a lot of mixed feelings from that first set of conversations you had with people.
I did, yes. I mean, I had 2 or 3 neighbours that had... Well, the neighbour I dashed over to with the camera, he'd seen it that night, and, he said he'd seen it previously as well. And I had another neighbour who'd lived here 30 years, and she'd never seen anything like that at all. She thought we were a bit crazy. And then another neighbour, a few months after that, her mother was walking up at Painswick Beacon with her little dog, and a cat followed them. And she was really frightened. So, those neighbours believed me then. I've got friends that believed me, and I've still to this day got friends that absolutely refuse to believe it, which is really strange, I find, because it's not like I'm saying there's aliens from Mars in the field, it's just a leopard, and leopards can live anywhere.
And your point about flamingos is a great one. Can you explain that?
Yeah. Well, I just thought, if I'd said to somebody I was walking along the canal in Stroud and I saw a flamingo, people would say, "Are you sure? Can you describe it?" And I would describe it, and they would say, "Oh, well, it's escaped from Slimbridge or somewhere." They'd have an explanation for it. Whereas you say, "Well, I've seen this big cat," and some people just flatly refuse because I suppose they're scared of the implications of that, or they think that Britain's such a sweet little island, we shouldn't have predators that size wandering around. So it's a very interesting response from people.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And I think that also, some people feel people who don't know the behaviour of these animals think they would be blatant. They would be much more visible, much more sort of in your face and whatever, and they don't realise how secretive and shy and stealthy they are and have to be.
Yes.
So there's various reasons, I think. But I sort of understand it. As it can be frustrating. But did you find it frustrating?
I did find it a bit frustrating, yeah, because some people thought I was mistaken and some people just thought I was lying. Friends that I've known for years and I've never told a lie, you know. So I did find it a bit frustrating, but now I've just learned to let it go and, you know. And then I've got other friends. A couple of summers after that, a friend phoned me, and he'd always been somebody that had said, "Oh, I don't know, it sounds a bit crazy. You know, you must have thought it was a cat and it was a dog." And then he was up on the common where they have the boot sales, and he phoned me frantic one summer's evening saying, I've seen it. And he'd actually seen a puma up there. He'd seen a beige coloured big cat with his son. And so he believes now, because he'd seen it. It's until people see it with their own eyes, they don't seem to. Some people do, but some people just can't take it in.
Yeah. Did that make you extra determined to try and get it on camera to some extent?
To some extent, but by then I'd kind of fallen in love with it and I wanted to protect it. So we didn't know if that was the only one, but according to Frank and to you, Rick, the people I've spoken to have said, no, it's not the only one. They're all over the country, you know. So, but I wanted to protect it. So I didn't want to go to the papers and say, oh, look, aren't I great? I've seen this great big cat, you know, and come and take pictures of me. We wanted to keep its location a secret just to protect it, because we didn't want trophy hunters coming poisoning it or trying to shoot it. You know, and the local landowners on the whole seemed quite pleased that they're around because they keep the deer down.
That seems to be quite a common reaction we get all over the country, actually. The people are very guarded about revealing them because of the consequences of wider knowledge about it. But maybe I think people are perhaps too concerned about letting it be known. I think people have a perception there'll be trophy hunters and there'll be hassle, and there might not be. But I think because of that perception, people do keep it more quiet than they might otherwise do, which is often frustrating if you're trying to follow up and get evidence and pursue things, because you have to sort of get people's trust to get the information. But that's how it is. That's the nature of the subject.
Yes. Yeah.
But what about, you did actually end up in the press, didn't you, and talked about it?
Yes.
And how did you find that experience?
It was, I mean, the local paper was fine, you know, and it was a friend of a friend that was the journalist, and he came round and he was sympathetic to keeping it a secret. But then as soon as it rolls out on paper, it's, the beast of the Five Valleys. And it's like it's not a beast, it's just a cat that lives here, you know, or it's panther on the prowl. It wasn't prowling, it was just going about its business looking for mice as far as I could see.
Photos of a snarling panther.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. He took my photo, and then there was next to me, I've seen the beast of the Five Valleys in speech marks, as though I'd said it, which was a bit like, but it's too late. It's out in the newsagents, so...
Yeah, you also had the national tabloids doorstepping you, didn't you?
I did, yeah. They got hold of it and they came, and I had to turn them away. I think somebody came and wanted to film me holding a camera. I can't remember which paper that was, but I was a bit strict with them. But whatever you give them, they sensationalise it. So.
Yeah. Didn't one of the national press phone you up and ask where it was, as if you could go and...
Yes, yeah, where is it? Can we go and take a picture of it? Yeah,
Great.
They did. Yeah. And they've got a huge territory, so of course I don't know where it is.
Yeah. And didn't it come down your road, you think, in the snow once?
Yes. I didn't see it. This was my next door neighbour, who was a disbeliever at the time, and it had been snowing... And we were snowed in, and my son at the time, he had a motorbike at the time outside the house, and I've since been told that they're attracted to the smell of diesel. I don't know if that's true or not, or, but she had a little dog, and she'd got it out in the garden for a wee, and it was dark. It was 8-9 o'clock on a winter's night, and she just looked over the garden wall, and it was sniffing around my son's motorbike. And the little dog saw it and went crazy, and she picked the dog up and took it in and shut the door and wouldn't come out. But by then the snow had been disturbed with lots of footprints, so it was really hard to try and get paw marks. And we thought we saw some very big paw marks, but it was never established if they were cat marks or dog marks.
Yeah, and that can happen quite a lot, actually. I think sometimes people look to the biggest print that's around, and often the biggest print around may be a dog rather than the cat, because cats can not always have as big a print as you expect.
Yeah, I mean, by then I'd researched it and discovered cats tend to have a leading toe rather than it being completely symmetrical. So we took some photos in the snow, but there were claw marks. So some people said, "Oh, it can't be a leopard." They retract their claw, but then other people said, "But it's icy." And then cats, and my cat does, if it's skidding around, it puts its claws out to get a grip. So,
Yeah. And just for the audience, thinking, why would it be in a residential road? I mean, the roads round here and some of the residential areas, they do sort of merge with the hillside, don't they? So
they do,
animal doesn't distinguish between the residential areas and the hillsides and the orchards and the pasture. That's all one thing.
Yes, because at the end of this road, it's only 20 yards from my house, and it's just fields then. So, there's a fence there now, but there wasn't then. And the cat would just go from one field, walk up the street for a bit, and go into another field.
Yeah.
But the following winter, in the snow in January, I couldn't get out again, and I was off work because we couldn't drive to work, and I saw it across the valley in the same field, a different part of the field where I'd filmed it, but I saw it over in the valley again, just sniffing around by some trees, and I took a picture with my phone, but of course that's not going to be very good either. And I saw it maybe for 3 or 4 minutes that time.
And I know you and Frank tried to put cameras in the field where it was seen, and you filmed it from across from your house. But the landowner got wind of the fact that that was all about, and felt if you're going to do that, he wanted lots of money. So that restricted
it did.
Possibility.
It did. And then we got, you talked about the documentary earlier, so... The filmmaker gave us 3 cameras to put out, and we found out who rented the other field, and we asked them, and they said, yes, you can put them up. So we had some big steel boxes made on big wooden stakes in the ground. We put them in their woods, and they said they know that there's a cat around because they keep sheep, and the sheep go crazy. And they have some pigs as well, and the pigs won't come out of their houses when they know that there's a cat around. So we had 3 cameras out there for about 5 or 6 months, and then they all got stolen. So,
which can happen. I mean, it happens to me. I know. However much you think you've camouflaged them and tucked them away, they can get... And it might be private land, but people are, trespassing or whatever. So it's an occupational hazard, unfortunately. And of course, it's just as much thinking what was on the film of that camera that got nicked rather than the camera itself.
Absolutely, because we'd check them. We'd go over and get the cards out and check them, but maybe only every 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned about the filmmaker. And that whole episode, that must have been quite exciting when that sort of scaling exercise was done and you had to get Frank down in the field with a scale cutout cat. Can you tell us quickly about that?
Yes. So Mark, the filmmaker, came down and we set up a camera in my bedroom window where I'd filmed it from, the exact location. And we had it playing on the computer so we could see exactly where in the field I'd filmed it. And then we sent Frank over there. And we were just communicating on the phones, saying left a bit, right a bit, up a bit, down a bit, until we got him in the exact spot where we could pinpoint where the cat had run across. And he had, I think he had a big scale cutout of a big black leopard. So he stood in the field holding that. And I think he had a meter ruler as well. So we superimposed them. It took quite a few hours one evening. And then... I think they then took it down to the BBC in Bristol, and we had some experts look at it, and they said, yeah, absolutely. And they gave measurements, which I can't remember, but it was pretty big.
Yeah, I remember that it was 3.5 feet in the body, which is nose to rump, and 2.5 feet in the tail, so 6 foot overall.
Yes, that sounds
which
right.
doesn't make it as big as some, but it's still way bigger than any sort of domestic cat we'd know.
Yes, much bigger.
Yeah. And that sort of conversation about Professor with Frank analysing it and commenting on it is filmed and is parked for this documentary, and it's really helpful. But I think, Corinne, I know you're talking about, say, black leopard, and we'll come on to that again in a minute, but I know that conversation with the Professor and Frank and my observation and friends and other contacts' observations of the cat that you filmed, when we look at it, we don't necessarily feel it's a nailed-on black leopard or a nailed-on dark puma. It's almost like it's difficult to identify and put an actual known species to, and that's part of the fascination about it. I know some people have said, "Oh, well, it's adapting. It's a British one. It's several generations on, and it's adapted to sort of pasture and semi-scrubland. It's not a forest leopard or a forest type puma cat." It's intriguing, but I know that you feel it is you feel it is most likely a black leopard.
Well, I think so. Just you're the expert, but just looking at it and and looking at images on Google and books that you've shown me and things. I wasn't close up to it, but it was black, and but it had the strange thing I noticed was a lot of those pictures of a typical leopard, they have more rounded ears, whereas this one had more pointed ears. So
that's something in itself, you see.
But a big tail.
Yeah.
Big tail. I've got 2 cats, and the proportion of their bodies to their tails are nothing like that. His tail was huge.
Yeah, through this podcast series, people will hear me asking the witnesses, the guests, about the length of the tail, and it is, as you say, it's that proportional length of the tail. Did you notice anything? I know it's a long way away, but anything about it? What other features about its movement or appearance made you think that is different from a domestic cat or any other animal that's known?
Well, I knew it wasn't a domestic cat because I wouldn't have been able to see that with my naked eye from here. You could just about see a big fox from here without binoculars. So I knew it wasn't a normal-sized domestic cat. And people say, "Oh, it must have been a dog." Because people tend to see them and they report them as though it was bigger than a Labrador. And people say, "Oh, maybe it was a Labrador." But I've got a Labrador. I know what a dog looks like, and I know how a dog moves. And if a dog's sniffing, I see dogs in that field, and if they're playing around, sniffing around in there, they're all over the place, zigzagging, getting excited, jumping around. And this was just on a mission, it knew what it was doing, and it wasn't sneaking around, but it was going around in a straight line with its nose to the ground, sniffing for things. And then when it ran across the field, it was just really graceful, this kind of grace you wouldn't get with a dog.
Yeah.
It just moved. It was like slinking, or it was gracefully running. It didn't move and didn't look like a dog.
And you probably wouldn't have been able to see a collar, but I always feel the people who say, "Oh, it must have been a dog," well, the witnesses who would see a dog would see a collar.
Yes.
On most dogs,
Yes.
95% of dogs would be wearing a collar.
Yeah.
And these animals don't appear to be wearing collars that
No.
get reported as big cats. Yeah.
No, and it's if you go around to your friend's house and they've got a dog and a cat, and the dog comes in the room, you're not going to say, "Oh, is that your cat?" It's a dog. They're so different. Even if their dog is the same size as their cat, you can tell a dog from a cat. So that it just makes me laugh really when people say, "Oh, it must have been a dog."
Yeah. Okay. Now there's a sort of finale to this where you did see it up close,
Yes.
and that is intriguing, and that's where your own dog plays a part in this. So
Yes.
Can you tell? And your daughter, I think, was walking it locally.
Yes.
Yeah. So can you tell us about that?
Yes, so that was, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago now. And it was October, Sunday afternoon. And we'd been out for a walk and we came back through the field at the end of the road. My teenager then, she was about 12, went to pick there was some thistle heads. So they went to be collected and I brought the dog home. And then suddenly she ran home saying, "It's in the field, it's in the field." And I said, What's in the field? She said, get the dog in. She was really scared that it was going to attack our Labrador. But he was in the house with me and By this point, Mark, the filmmaker, had given me a better camera, digital zoom camera, handheld thing. So I've grabbed that and left the dog in the house and went up to the field, by which point my daughter was really frightened and saying, don't go in, it'll get you. So my adrenaline was racing, but I went in there and she said it had run up a tree. She thought it was the dog climbing the tree and then thought, hang on a minute, actually our dog doesn't climb trees. And then she noticed the dog was in the field and coming home with me. And she said it just leapt up the tree using its front claws to dig in and pull itself up this kind of smallish tree. And then she realised, hang on, that's a big cat, and she ran out of the field and got me. I went in and I was in the field saying, which tree? I couldn't see anything. I thought she was mistaken. And then I looked around, she was saying, it's the tree you're standing in front of, Mum. And I said, oh, there's nothing there that I can, the leaves are just about gone off this tree. And then I looked down and it was sniffing around at the bottom of the tree. So obviously in that time of me getting the camera and going up there, it had come down the tree and was just sniffing around the bottom of the tree. And it was probably about 20 feet from me. And all that was between me and it was just a little chicken wire fence. And it's, with all the shouting, it knew I was there. And it just looked up at me and turned round, carried on doing its sniffing. And that's what frightened me really more than anything, was that it looked at me and thought, oh, there's a human there, I'm not scared. And then my daughter shouting, my adrenaline being high, and I had this camera that I had the sun behind me, so I had to flick the screen open and do the settings and get it running. And I just thought, do you know what? There's a leopard 20 feet from me. I'm going to leave. So I kind of reversed out of the field and then kicked myself for not filming it. And I went and got my neighbour and he came with me. And of course it had gone by then, or it had gone. There was loads of bramble thickets. So it was probably just sitting in there laughing at us. So, yeah. So I didn't get close-up footage, but I saw it. And I can understand now why, when people say, well, why didn't you film it on your phone? People that see the cats. Because you're too transfixed with it to think working the phone and finding the app to record. And, you know, when a leopard's 20 feet from you, you're probably not going to want to do that.
Yeah, sure. But it would have been the best footage ever
It
recorded,
would have been,
wouldn't it?
I know.
It's hard to forgive you, but we do, I think.
I'm so sorry.
What were your emotions? Was it fear or other?
I was so high on adrenaline, so excitement and fear, but I'd say more excitement. The cat didn't threaten me at all. It didn't do anything that suggested get away from me. You know, it just looked at me and then carried on with what it was doing. So I just backed away because I was a bit scared of what could happen, because it just wasn't frightened of me. But looking back, I think I could have probably just sat down, had a cup of tea, got the camera running and filmed it. But of course, retrospect, you know, it's a great thing. Absolutely.
And just seeing it much closer must have been fascinating in a way, to compare with the long distance sighting.
Yes, it was, and I'm
not sure it was the same cat?
No, I'm not convinced to this day it was the same cat.
Gosh, I didn't know that.
Oh, okay, no, looking at the sizings that the professor gave, that was a big cat over there, and this was, I'd say, slightly smaller. I've got a small Labrador, and it was much longer than him, and a massive tail that was like, it didn't peter out at one end. It was the same thickness all the way along. And but it wasn't quite as tall as my dog, but it was a lot longer. So that's when I saw it close up, that surprised me, that it was a bit shorter in the leg, but longer than I expected.
Well, I still reckon it could be the same one, you know.
Yeah, it's difficult to tell.
Yeah, I mean, if it was, let's say it was definitely a black leopard, then that is a sort of female black leopard sort of size, I would wager. Yeah.
Could be. And that seems to be its route. From all the sightings in this valley, it seems to come down off one side, go through that field, cross the main road, and then go up into the field where I filmed it, and then off over the top.
Yeah. Yes, a few people have seen it crossing at the same
Yes.
part of the road, haven't they?
Yeah.
Down in the valley bottom.
That's
yeah.
right. So yeah, it could have been the same. I don't know.
Yeah. How would you describe it when that close up? Was it in colour and texture and fur length and that sort of thing?
Yeah, quite. It was quite thick fur. I remember the fur being quite thick. It didn't look like a scrawny cat, and it wasn't dull, but it wasn't really shiny either. It was kind of somewhere in between, and it looked well fed. It wasn't bony. Looked quite healthy, really. Yeah, but black all over. At 20 feet, I didn't see the spots underneath it. So.
Which is, can be difficult. Yeah, that's assuming it was a black leopard, because there is this debate about are they all definitely black leopards? And
Yeah.
of course, Frank has a view, which we'll hear about in episode 4, that not all of them are black leopards.
No, and a lot of the neighbourhood cats hang out in that field. So we see a lot of the neighbourhood cats and our own cats in that field. So I was absolutely certain it wasn't a neighbour's cat.
Yeah. And its movement, what do you think it was doing at the bottom of that tree?
It was sniffing around. Maybe again it was looking for mice. It was the bottom of the tree was surrounded by bramble bushes and fallen leaves and twigs. So maybe it was just sniffing around looking for... Or maybe we disturbed it and it had gone up the tree to hide and come down and... I don't know if dogs sniff everywhere. I don't know if cats sniff for other signs of animals, because there's a lot of badgers around here as well. So maybe it had sniffed a badger. There's a set only 50 yards from there. So
I've certainly been called to a completely filleted out badger carcass within a couple of miles from here. That was about the same time, that same couple of years.
Okay.
In that time, and it's hard to think what else could have quickly and neatly consumed a whole badger.
Yes.
And just left the sort of the eviscerated, carcass.
Yes. Well, a dog
remains.
wouldn't dream of doing that, would it? And a dog, if it did, it would rip it to pieces.
And about 3 years ago, myself and somebody else in our network were called to a farmer, probably 2 miles from here, who'd had one older lamb, but big and strong. Again, completely eaten out overnight. He'd had no experience of big cat issues, but when I looked at that, and we did get some tooth pit marks on the mandibles, the jaw bones of that, and in another episode we'll explain tooth pit impacts, marks on the bones, basically from the carnassial teeth of the cat.
Okay, yeah.
So that one was sort of confirmed by tooth pit analysis, and that made me think, is Corin's cat, still around, and this is occasional, hassle it's causing.
Yeah.
But you don't, am I right in saying that you don't hear about neighbourhood cats or dogs or local goats or smallholders, animals being taken? And
I haven't. The only one I heard of was what I mentioned earlier, where my neighbour's mother was walking at Painswick Beacon, and it followed her, and at the time the experts thought it was because she had this small dog with her, and she was being stalked. It followed her, and every time she stopped and turned around, it would cower down. And then I think a coach came past and scared it.
Oh, yes, sure. Yes, we talk about that in episode 4 with Frank.
Yeah.
Because we've already recorded that one, but that's going to come after yours.
So she was really scared and felt like she was being followed by this cat, and it had its eyes on her dog for tea.
Yeah.
But no, I've not heard of any animals going missing.
But you have deer all around here, don't you?
Oh,
and rabbits and natural game that would keep a cat happy for its larder.
Yes.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, it would.
And you hinted earlier on that you obviously didn't want to compromise the cat. What is your view generally of big cats being around? And you've just mentioned a lady was stalked and whatever, and I just mentioned, a sheep kill, which I think was a big cat-related one. So there are some issues from them, but what's your personal view?
But I think, in the Forest of Dean, we've got all the wild boar, and they've now spread out and they're not really controlled there anymore. There have been sightings outside the forest of those. And the powers that be just put up warning notices and say, this is what a boar looks like. If you see one, this is what we advise you to do. And I think, if there's a hot spot for big cats and people are worried, then they should just put signs up. But there's all sorts of implications.
Yeah. I think it is tricky because signs can have unintended consequences. Signs could scare people. Signs could bring the very people you're worried about being trophy hunters around, thinking, hang on, this is the place to loiter for a big cat. I mean, it may not happen, but that's, signs may not be the answer necessarily.
They may not be, and I think, big cats tend, like you said earlier, leopards tend to be much more secretive. And boar are there, aren't they? And if they see you and they don't want you to be there, they're going to run after you, whereas a leopard's much less likely to do that unless you're threatening if it's got cubs or, if it's in the middle of dinner. But if it's in the middle of dinner around here, it would probably just leave it and go and get another deer. We're not talking about the Serengeti, or you see these wildlife documentaries where if you approached a leopard eating its tea, then you'd be dessert. But for this, they're just like, well, I'd get another one. And they're the apex predator. So there's so many deer in this country, and rabbits and pheasants. There's a larder for them, isn't it? The British countryside.
That may that abundance of prey may explain why they don't seem to get stressed and don't seem to need to turn on our pets or get domestic livestock or whatever. So
yes,
I think you may be onto something there.
Yeah. They're not short of food.
Yeah. So you're on the sort of protective side of things for them.
Yes,
Corinne,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I might think differently if it had taken my dog that day in the field. I may think differently, but at the moment, no, I don't see any threat. Nobody's been hurt. Nobody's been attacked, as far as we know. And people have been reporting sightings since the 70s, 1970s.
Earlier than that.
Heard them and nobody's been attacked. So
that we know.
That we know. Nobody's reported being attacked. I think we would have probably heard about it. So no, I don't see them as a threat at all, really.
A final sort of thought about the wider community. Do you feel attitudes are just the same as they were when you first saw this, that there's some people who are open-minded, some people who are stubborn skeptics, some people who are in denial and it's just how it is, or do you feel that there's sort of a slight growing awareness?
I think there's a growing awareness, and I think it's because, you could have been in a room of people 10, 11 years ago and most of them would have just thought, okay, what were you drinking that night? But now you'd mention that and somebody in the room will say, oh, do you know what? My brother-in-law thought he saw one of those, or, oh, my neighbour said they saw one. Somebody seems to, at any gathering you're at, somebody either thinks they've seen one, they know they've seen one, or somebody they know has seen one. So, no, I think there's a lot more awareness of it now.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Corinne. I really appreciate having you on the show.
You're welcome.
Now, our word of the week this episode is preternatural or preternatural. It means beyond nature. It comes from the Latin preternaturum, which means beyond the natural world, but it doesn't mean supernatural. It just means animals, creatures which have characteristics which are difficult to comprehend because they are so remarkable. So I think it's very relevant to the big cats. We don't understand them fully in this country especially because we're simply not used to how stealthy, how semi-invisible, how silent they can be. So we almost see them as something beyond nature. So preternatural is a good term for thinking about them. And that Latin word preternaturum never meant to be supernatural. It just means at the limits of nature's powers, really. Okay, well, we're staying in Gloucestershire for our second guest of the show, and I'm going to welcome Dave, who had an intriguing encounter a few years ago west of Gloucester, the other side of the river from Corinne's situation. So Almost certainly a different cat, because unlikely that a cat would cross a bridge on the River Severn or swim across it. So this one is another close-up encounter, and we're going to explore it in full with the witness, Dave. So welcome to the show, Dave. Thanks very much for coming on. And if you could just start from the beginning and tell us where you were roughly and when it was and what happened.
So I had my sighting in the winter of 2011. So it was at night. I was out lamping rabbits in a field, and I would say the time was around 1 a.m. My dad was on a night shift at the time. So I was focusing my lamp on some rabbits in a small field, and behind the field there was a copse. I didn't really pay much attention to it, but I did see some eyes shine in the copse behind, but I was focused mainly on around 6 rabbits in the field in front of me. I fired a shot eventually, but I missed. I went to the area anyway, and I got slightly closer, and I noticed the eye shine remained in place. As I got closer, I thought, what is it, and why isn't it going away? Usually, if I see a fox or anything like that, then it will leave the area quite quickly as soon as it knows that there's someone around. This eye shine remained in place, and I began to get closer and closer. Originally, I would say I was 80 metres away. As I got closer, I got within around 25 metres, and I started to think then, why hasn't this thing moved on? All the rabbits had gone. And then I got closer and closer, and the eyes were very an orange colour. They were very round, I would say bigger than golf ball size. And as I got closer, I began to pick out more of an outline. The outline of the animal was in the hedge, so it was behind a very thin wire fence. And I started getting closer and closer, and I began to see more of the animal. So I noticed, first of all, it was quite high off the ground, which wasn't something that I would expect with a fox. It was very dark in colour, so it blended in quite well. So it was quite difficult to see the outline, and I kept getting closer, and I got within around 10 metres. And at this point, I got a really good, clear look at it. And it was very, at a big head. It's probably about 2.5 feet off the ground at its highest point, rounded ears. It was black in colour. I couldn't see any markings. And that's when I really started to get concerned about what I was looking at. And at that point, we probably stared at each other for around 5 seconds, and then it slowly raised itself up. It was stood in a crouching position at this point. Got onto all fours, and it went from towards the right. It stood up towards the right, went into thicker cover, and I could only describe it as around 5 feet, 6 feet in the body maybe, with a very, very long tail, very muscular build, and that's when I really panicked and backed off pretty quickly. As it was walking, it was still looking at me, but yeah, it was walking around into deeper cover, and yeah, I left the scene pretty quickly after that and made my way home.
You didn't have it illuminated when you were right up close, Dave, did you?
Yeah, I did when I was up close. Yeah, it was only originally that I couldn't really see a lot of it. When I got right up close to it, I could see a lot of the outline of the animal and a lot of its features.
Did you see the eye shine at all?
Yeah, the eye shine was a deep orange eye shine colour.
Did you detect its sort of attitude? Was it just sort of confidently and quietly walking away because you were both too close to each other, or did it have any other sort of attitude in its sort of poise and movement?
No, yeah, I would say it was just casually making its way off. It didn't appear aggressive, just, slinked off, minding its own business, really.
Yeah, and you were obviously totally surprised and shocked, and what sort of, how scared would you say you were?
I would say I was very scared. I moved away very quickly and got home as fast as I could. Despite having a gun, I was still very unnerved by the encounter.
Yeah, and what do you, in terms of it being there, are you assuming it was watching the same rabbits that you were lamping to sort of take a few? It was wanting to do the same thing as you were doing?
Yeah, I would say it was, yeah. Yeah, I think it was just watching the rabbits, and we both happened to be watching them at the same time.
Yeah, and you'd had no knowledge of big cat reports in this location. It was just minutes from your house, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was about a 10-minute walk away from my house. I'm aware of a lot of reports in the Forest of Dean. My dad had seen one previously, but no, I wasn't aware of any reports in that area, no.
What, in terms of the respective movements, you backing off and it walking away, you being that close to it, Do you think it could have gone wrong? You know, something awkward could have happened if you'd have reacted differently?
Yeah, I think if someone else had been in my position and they'd have panicked, it could have certainly gone a lot worse. You know, it could have gone wrong, certainly, yeah. You know, if someone had decided to take a shot at it or anything like that, it could have been a totally different situation.
Yeah, or the cat suddenly felt threatened for whatever reason. It could have lashed out or whatever.
Yeah, I wouldn't have fancied my chances, put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. Would you make an assessment that it was a black leopard, or was it too difficult to do from your sort of quick shocked situation?
Yeah, I would definitely say it was that sort of calibre of cat. On the large side, I would say. Quite thick set and muscular. It wasn't, you know, lean. It was big built, you know, almost a rugby player like cat.
Did any particular features stand out? Were you able to sort of assess, you know, the length of the tail or anything like that?
Yeah, so the length of the tail was very long, quite thick throughout. I think it had a slightly thicker end. The ears were very rounded. The eyes were very round again. And yeah, big paws, just a thick set animal, really.
Mm-hmm. Did you see coloration of the fur at all?
Yeah, so it was black, and I couldn't see any mottles underneath. Obviously, it's quite a while ago now, but from my recollection, I couldn't see any mottling at all. But the detail was quite limited because obviously we were through a little fence. There was a few pieces of vegetation in the way, and I was only using a torchlight as well.
Mm-hmm. What did you do immediately afterwards?
I called my dad, actually, who was on a night shift at the time, and told him what I'd seen, and he suggested I get home as quickly as possible. And then I text Frank. I got his number online and sent him a message.
This is Frank Tunbridge, who we'll meet in episode 4 of this series. Yeah.
Yeah. So I text Frank, and he got in touch the next day, and I believe yourself and Frank came down a couple of days later.
Yeah. And you also then started getting interested in just scouting out the local countryside and looking for signs, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So I had a good look around. Didn't find anything really interesting, but yeah, I've been interested in it ever since, really.
I always think it's a shame when even people in your own family don't believe you. But I gather you've got a brother who is a sort of arch skeptic who remains quite a stubborn skeptic. And how does that go?
Yeah, he does. He's not seen one himself, and I think he's just a bit sceptical about the whole thing, really. He concedes that, you know, there may be one or two that have been released, but I don't think he believes that there's, you know, they're potentially widespread. I don't think he thinks there's any in our area.
How does he explain what you say you encountered?
He puts it across as potentially a large dog or a large domestic cat. But he's very much one of those people, unless he sees it himself, he's not going to believe it.
Mm-hmm. It didn't have a collar, I presume. You were able to see it be that close.
No, there's no collar on it.
No, so that would rule out, although you could have a dog in the countryside late at night without a collar, but a dog wouldn't behave like that, presumably, in most situations.
No, it definitely wasn't a dog.
Yeah, and how long did that whole encounter take, Dave? It was watching you for a few minutes, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was probably a few minutes. As I started to edge closer, then yeah, it all ended pretty quickly. And I didn't investigate any further, as you know, it was in the middle of winter at night, so I went home very quickly afterwards.
And can you talk us through the next sort of twist of the saga? Because there was a lost dog poster right in the sort of entrance to the fields where the paths go across the fields, I gather.
Yeah, so a farmer used to walk his dog on the land at around 6 a.m. every morning, and we saw this sign, or Frank saw this sign, and he got in touch with the farmer. And they had a conversation. So yeah, he walked his dog, Springer Spaniel, every morning at 6 a.m. Obviously, it's still dark in the mornings at that time of year. And he said he saw it run into the copse, and it never came out again. He said he didn't hear any noises or anything. 1 minute it was there, and the next minute it was gone. And it's never done anything like that before. So it certainly got him and us thinking that, you know, potentially there was some sort of interaction, and perhaps the dog bit the dust.
Yeah. And we'll talk about sort of impacts, behaviour of dogs through the series of podcasts, but that is obviously no definitive proof, but it is food for thought. He also didn't need much persuading about big cats being around because he'd seen one himself, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe he farms in the area, and he did explain that he had seen one, what he describes as lactating, so it had teats on it at the time that were very obvious to him. So yeah, he had a sighting himself.
Yeah, I think because he's sort of referred to it as she, and Frank asked why he knew the gender, and the lactating bit then came through. So, yeah, but you haven't had other reports from that locality since, Dave, even though it's quite close. So difficult to know whether it's still around or goes that way occasionally. That's part of the conundrum, isn't it, of the subject?
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, there's not one resident in the area. I think it was just passing through. But there are sightings all around. So yeah, I think it was just a case of passing through the area, and we met just by chance.
Mm. And it sort of triggered a lifelong interest now. I mean, you keep a close interest in the topic and network with lots of other people now.
Yeah, so I've been interested now for nearly 10 years. So yeah, I'm well involved.
Would you want to see another one, Dave, having had that experience?
I would, but not such a close encounter. That for me was too close. So yeah, I would like to see another one, but at distance, and not coming into close contact with each other, because I would be worried about if we were in close contact and there was limited areas for us to go, I would be worried about the interaction or potential interaction there. Yeah.
That sort of brings me on to the sort of key question of your attitude to big cats being in the wild. What do you generally think personally about big cats being around in the British countryside?
I think it's a good thing. I certainly don't view it as a negative thing. As long as they aren't causing a problem, as far as I'm concerned, they should be allowed to remain where they are. It would only be if you had a prolific livestock killer or a cat that was showing signs of being aggressive to people potentially, or domestic animals.
Do you still do lamping and that sort of thing?
I haven't done it for some time, no.
Okay, but I mean, you used to sort of carry firearms in the countryside, but what about that situation with a big cat and potentially needing to or deciding to use a gun or potentially using a gun? What's your attitude on that sort of thing?
I think it would be a last resort. I think it's one of those things that could go very wrong. I think if you were to miss or to only hit it in a certain area that's going to wound it, then you potentially got a problem animal on your hands, which could then in turn lead to livestock killings and potential conflicts with people. So no, in my opinion, it would be using a firearm would be a real last resort. There's a farmer near me who had a prolific amount of sheep kills. All of them looked to be cat related, and he never once said to me that he wanted to shoot it or anything like that, even despite the fact that it caused hundreds of pounds worth of damages to him.
Yeah. I think if it's the one that I met, I mean, he and his son were very keen on the situation stopping somehow, but they didn't want to shoot it. But in fact, their preference was for it to be trapped if possible and taken away for a wildlife park or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting that how responsible most people that we encounter tend to be, even if they sort of feel a bit uneasy about a potential cat around. They don't want to sort of take the pitchforks to the hills or anything worse. Okay, I think we're running out of time, Dave, and that's really helpful. Thank you very much for that really full-on encounter and sharing that experience with us. So thanks everybody for listening to this episode, and the following episode is going to be a trip to Exmoor. We'll be looking at the Exmoor Beast, past and present, and meeting the creator of Bod, the Beast of Bodmin Moor. So more about that next episode. Thanks for listening, and take care everyone.